Okay, I'd like to present and welcome Oren. He holds a BA in Mathematics and Economics and an MA in Economics from the Hebrew University. Since 2013, he has been a senior researcher in the Economic Research Department of the National Insurance Institute, writing and editing articles and position papers focusing on poverty and inequality in Israel. He's currently writing his doctoral dissertation on intergenerational mobility under the supervision of Professor Zeira and Eisenberg at the Hebrew University.
So thank you very much for having me. I will start by presenting you the measurements Reuven has asked me to calculate according to both methods. Those measurements are calculated by the 85 birth cohorts, and simply as you can see, both methods suggest more or less 50% absolute mobility. Probably more work has to be done and could be done and presenting some kind of trend which is available to calculate by the Katz-Kruger statistics. אפשר לעבור למצגת הבאה. Okay, so I will present one of the papers of my PhD thesis in which I'm estimating intergenerational elasticity of income in Israel, intergenerational mobility in income in general, and analyze it and explore it by the use of administrative data. So the first objective of the paper is to measure an intergenerational elasticity measurement, which will allow me to include Israel to existing cross-country comparisons. Another contribution is to address variation in Israel across population groups in Israel, and to address patterns regarding intergenerational mobility. I will try to introduce factors which are affecting intergenerational mobility that haven't been yet explored in the relevant literature by exploiting some unique characteristics we have in the Israeli society. So starting with the main result, here is Israel in the Great Gatsby curve as it is presented in Korak's paper from 2016. As you can see, although Israel has very high inequality level, which is much similar to United States and the UK, my measurement of the intergenerational elasticity are standing for very higher mobility, which is to some extent surprising. I measure mobility which is similar to Germany, Sweden, and so forth. So during my talk, I will try to share with you my attempt to understand this allegedly gap. Those attempts are not necessarily successful, but I believe they are interesting. So the overall intergenerational elasticity is the average across all of the wage distribution, while similar to many other nations, it is based on a non-linear relationship between the log parental earnings and the log children earnings and the log parental earnings. Therefore, once I am estimating the intergenerational elasticity in income by the use of this log-log regression, I am turning to use rank-rank method, which is much more linear and makes me feel comfortable to conduct cross-section analysis on the basis of linear regressions. So the rest of the talk is built as following. I'll present the literature briefly. I'll present the data I use. I'll present the IGE method, the sample I use, and some additional basic results. I'll turn to the rank. I'll present the method and the sample I use, which will allow me to present to you the cross-section analysis, which will be focused on the places of the ethnicity of segmentation in Israel and the place of the immigration on intergenerational mobility. Finally, I will sum up and conclude. So consistently with the majority of the literature regarding the IGE estimation and comparison across nations, I will also be focusing on Sun-Fuzer's pairs. I will follow the guidelines suggested by Grau from 2004 in order to be able to represent you a comparable measurement of the intergenerational elasticity in income. For the rank method, I will follow Dal Dillier and the very cited paper of Chetty and Dal from 2014. Regarding Israel, relevant literature is very scarce. We have a very recent paper written by Milaloni and Zev Krill from the Ministry of Finance, who estimate an IGE of 0.216, which they understand it is biased due to life cycle issues, and adjust it for an estimation which is much more similar to mine. Most of our results are consistent. One main result they suggest is that the very high mobility in Israel is due to higher mobility among immigrants. This result they suggest, I will suggest it is not. I will show you my results are the opposite of it. All the papers in Israel are written by Binstock and Frisch and Zussman from the Bank of Israel. They use two census data merged together, which allows them to observe information regarding both children and parents. But since this data allows them to observe earnings during ages which are not good representatives of permanent income, they measure biased downward biased estimators. Okay, so the data I use is based on the population registry records from the Ministry of Interior. It includes a unique ID for each individual in Israel, and allows me to match children to their parents according to this unique ID. These records also include demographic information such as gender, birth date, religion, birth of country, and registered address. To these records, I match information from the tax authority, which are salaries and self-employment income, and information from regarding education of matriculation exams. While the information I hold for matriculation exams are eligibility for a certificate, the overall average grade, and the number of credit units. And I also observe information according to the college attendance of each individual from the National Insurance Institute. For each method, I am building a unique sample. While for the IGE method, I am observing the birth cohort of 1975. I'm observing the children's earning while they are 35 to 39, and the father's earning while children are 11 to 20. Namely, their fathers are in their 40s. I omit from the sample two old and two young fathers, and after inflating each individual's earnings, I'm averaging them on time, while earnings consist of paid salary plus self-employment income for the children, and just paid salary for the fathers without the self-employment income, since this information is unavailable for the relevant periods. Overall, the average elasticity is this figure, meaning that on average 1% increase in father's earnings is associated with 0.28% increase in the children's earnings. As you can see, male children are less mobile than female children, and I won't show you it, but these measurements are robust to life cycle and attenuation issues, and it is also robust for the inclusion or exclusion of the self-employment data I don't hold for the relevant period. Okay, so now that we are aware of the estimations, and I hope I convinced you they are valid, I turn to the rank estimations, which are based on a more extensive sample of 74 to 78 birth cohorts. I observed both children and parents now earnings during 2 years only. This is legitimate, since this measurement is much less sensitive to the period length in which I observe the earnings. And when I want to utilize the matriculation exams data I hold, I have to take younger children and observe them on younger ages. So overall, the estimated rank correlation is about a quarter, and it is similar for males and females. It suggests that one decile increase in parents' earnings is associated with a quarter decile increase in the children's earnings. Note that when I'm using the younger cohort, this slope is standing for allegedly higher mobility, but we understand it is due to life cycle bias. The advantage of this sample is that I can observe a lot of information regarding their education. Therefore, if I choose to control for all of the information I hold for those the education of those individuals, we can see that the slope is about a half compared to the regression without the controls, which suggests the place of education in the shape of intergenerational consistency. Namely, it suggests that not all of the transmission is due to education. There is some place to labor market effects. Okay, so this is the relationship of the rank, which is linear, and as I told earlier, it allows me to conduct cross-sectional analysis on the basis of the linear regressions. And beginning with showing you correlations of intergenerational mobility with two main and interesting variables. First of them is the periphery. I'm using a periphery index published by the CBS in Israel. And each column here is standing for a simple rank-rank equation, which additional variables allowing the constant term to change, and an interaction term with the parent's rank allowing the slope to change. And as you can see, the more you live in the periphery, the less you are expected to earn. But more interestingly, it is also negatively correlated with intergeneration mobility. This holds only for the general non-ultra-Orthodox Jewish population, doesn't hold for the Arabs and for the ultra-Orthodox population. The second measurement I'm showing you is a proxy for schools quality. I'm following Chetty et al. From 2014 and regressing the achievement in the matriculation exam on parents' earnings and taking the residuals averaged over each high school while I observed the high school in which individual attended. So given this, assuming this is a valid proxy for schools quality, we can see it is correlated positively, as we accept, with intergeneration mobility. Interestingly, it is not correlated, it is correlated negatively with intergeneration mobility among the Arab population. I can't tell the mechanism behind it, but I'm guessing it's some kind of sorting. It is not correlated at all with the mobility among the Haredim population, the ultra-Orthodox. Now I turn to estimate the differences in intergeneration mobility among the different ethnic groups in Israel, which are same as before, the general Jewish population, the Haredim, ultra-Orthodox, and the Arab population. In the first column, you can see that focusing on the difference between Arabs and Jewish, you can see that the Arab population is much less intergenerationally mobile. And in the second column, you can see this result is robust when I control for geographic heterogeneity and the school's quality. Namely, this is not a result driven by the fact that the Arabs maybe lives in the north or in the south. It is robust to this issue. Note also that most of the gap between the Jewish and the Arab population remains when I control for the information I have regarding their education. Namely, most of the gap is most probably due to some kind of unequal opportunities in the labor market rather than in the education acquirement. When we tend to try to understand how much or what are the mechanisms in which this segmentation of the society in Israel is affecting the overall mobility, we can see that when we measure for each group separately its intergenerational this slope, the rank slope, it is lower than the overall slope, which is a result of the centralization of the Arab population over here. Stemming from the fact that, as we saw in the previous slide, they experience some kind of an automatic discount in their earnings. What makes all the overall slope be pulled down and be steeper and standing for a lower intergenerational mobility overall the society. So if we take this phenomena of the R population as some kind of cultural gap or some kind of anomaly, we can suggest that excluding this anomaly, intergenerational in Israel would have seemed in some extent higher. Okay, intergenerational elasticity will be more similar to the one of the Jewish population. I'll turn to now focus on the immigration and its interaction with intergenerational mobility. This is a great issue in Israel since it is a young country, constitutes of immigrants. As you can see in my sample, about 60% of the population are either immigrants or the children of the immigrants, while my estimation suggests that only among the non-Haredim Jewish population, the immigrant group is the least intergenerational mobile. Their children are a bit more mobile, and their grandchildren are the most mobile, similarly to the natives. If we put it on rank regression, we can see they are less mobile, and we can also see that this result is robust to the control of heterogeneity in the origin of the individuals, the origin continents. It is not some kind of different composition effect, and it is also robust to when I control heterogeneity in geography. Now, okay, so we cannot speak about the Israeli society without focusing on the differences, the variation between the origins themselves, from which origin each individual has its roots. So for this, I'm only focusing on the native population from the general Jewish population, and generally, in the first column, you can see that what we call the Mizrahim, the individuals with roots from Africa and West Asia, are less mobile, having about a zero coefficient with multiplication in the parent rank, compared to the Ashkenazim, which are individuals coming from Europe and America, which are more mobile. And this is also robust to geography variation. The last column suggests that when we control for higher education, sorry?
What is the reference group?
The reference group is the natives.
Israeli born.
Israeli born. Yeah.
To Israeli parents.
Yeah. Note that when we control for each individual's education, as we see it for this group, this variation is eliminated. Namely, almost fully eliminated. This group is worth expanding this issue on, but generally speaking, this variation across those groups is due to unequal opportunities in the education requirement, rather than unequal opportunities in the labor market, as we saw it is explaining the gap, the ethnic gap. So overall, if we are looking only on the natives, and assuming that the immigration effect should some point in the future will fade out, we're facing an intergenerational elasticity which is even lower. So finally, I was trying to understand how come the intergenerational mobility in Israel is too high, yes, as compared to its inequality levels and the pattern this curve is suggesting, and I'm showing you the opposite. A very, to sum up, a very big question mark is what is the effect of the mandatory military service we have in Israel, while intuition, at least mine, suggests that it has a positive effect on mobility, since there is some kind of social mixture and relationship are created between people from different family backgrounds. And 2 or 3 main additional results we've seen is regarding Arabs, which are less mobile, while it is mainly due to less equal opportunities in the labor market. Result about mobility and periphery, I believe it could be handled easily by policy, and most interestingly, to my opinion, is that even 2 generations after the immigration, family origins still plays a role in both in the overall outcomes, but also in the given opportunities. Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank Professor Guna for allowing me to talk here today. And it's not very common for rookies like me to talk in front of 80% of their work's bibliography. So it's a great opportunity for me. Waiting for the slides to come up. I know I have a few minutes because we don't have time, but I'm gonna use my Israeli chutzpah and still a few minutes from your lunch. So you'll have to come and grab me off stage. So I was asked to comment on Oren's work, and I intend to do that by presenting my own work. And that's not because I'm self-centered, it's because I think the best way to comment on a work or to support a work is to do an independent work with similar data with the same goals, and that's what we did. For the Ministry of Finance. This was a work published with Ze'ev Kriel, who's sitting in the back here, and also as my MA thesis in Tel Aviv University. Can I? No, I need to. There's a. Okay. May I? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay. So, from my humble position, I'm gonna. Can you go back a slide?
You can do it.
No, I cannot control.
Up and down.
Because there's another thing here. Okay, there's a discrepancy. Okay. So, can you can I like work on this Word document?
You can work on it, and I
Okay.
will push the slide.
Thank you. We last like 2 minutes here. So from my humble position to Oren's work, working with a similarly sourced data set, the data set is a rich one. As you can see, it seems reliable from all the tests that I did, and the work itself follows carefully all the requirements from the literature on to estimate the IGE, and it touches the essential unique characteristics of Israel for this kind of work, all the dashboard statistics that Korek talked about yesterday, and accounting for the different unique characteristics of Israel. I'm pressing it and it's not moving. It's not working.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just talk.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. And before we get to talk about the similarities and the differences between our works, let's first talk about our data set. So the sample itself consists of 300,000 observations after choosing the right cohorts for this work, and after taking the matches between parents and children. So the core sample is 300,000 observations. The income-wise, the income comes from the authority records, tax authority records. We have 4 years of income for children when they are 29 to 35, and we have 2 years of income of the parents when the kids are 20 and 24. That makes the parents 50 on average. And as you can see, this data set is rather limited with IGE characteristics that are required for this kind of estimation. So what we had to do to jump over this hurdle is find some other creative way to adjust our estimate. And what we did is we used our very similar data set characteristics to that of Chetty et al. 2014. We have the same birth cohorts. We have the same years of income when the kids are of the kids 2011 to 2012, and we have additional 2 years. And we're lacking 2 years or so, a couple of years in parents' income, but all in all, the data sets are pretty similar, and with a few assumptions, we make 2 corrections. One's based on the Mazunder-Chetty discussion throughout, like, I think 4 papers, when they discuss whose estimate is biased and who's not. Mazunder has Mazunder 2015 estimates the bias in Chetty's work to be about roughly 70%. I'm going to use that number to adjust my raw estimate to make it internationally comparable. The second adjustment is based on several papers of Korak, where he no way. Okay, so I'll not get into it, but we made some fixes, and I just yesterday I've added Oren Heller's estimate for intergenerational mobility elasticity, and this wasn't an aim and shoot scenario. We did that independently, and this is what we find. In the light green, you see our raw estimate, and then after the fixes, after the adjustments, we get lower mobility estimates, and it comes out roughly the same. Okay, so I think this supports Oren's result, and Oren's results support our exercise. And what's so special about this outcome could be viewed as Oren showed in the on the Gatsby curve. So Israel, you can see the raw estimate is downward biased as we expected, and Oren's is roughly 0.3. And after these fixes, we're not that kind of an outlier on the Gatsby curve, and we're trying to explain that. And this is where our works diverge, and we do not agree on the outcomes of immigrants. And this is the way we try to explain the relatively low, high mobility, even when given our high inequality. So first of all, let me describe who are the immigrants in my sample are, in my research. Immigrants are kids who are born to two parents who are born outside of Israel. And first thing you can see is these numbers. Those are the average ranks of parents and children. Immigrants came from lower income background and with higher education levels. So, and the kids reached higher ranks on average. I just want to show you that both groups include Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and we'll not get into a lot more in this slide. What we did is a very simplistic and very straightforward method. We just omit the immigrants from the sample. And this is not, I just want to emphasize, this is not the average of both, of course, because they have different averages. But when we omit the immigrants from our sample, there's a significant increase in the elasticity and therefore decrease in mobility, and this is where it gets us. Okay, so there's a jump, and this we need to think about the argument between our works. What Oren suggested that we do is we take out of the sample the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the Arabs. We need to discuss that further, but I'm not sure. I know that when Korak performs another international comparison, he's not going to put there the non-Jewish, non-Arab Orthodox sample elasticity. So I think it's not that relevant to take out the Arabs and Orthodox Jews out of the sample to test this idea. And the idea I assume is known to us all. It's very clear. People who came here with no skills, with skills not compatible with the labor market and with no language, and their kids did better. That's what we get here. This is a call for graph table. I'm gonna skip over it and let you read the work itself. The transition matrix, I'll just jump ahead and look at the four corners. In parentheses, you see the gap from Chetty et al. 2014, the comparable sample. And let's just look at this number, the American Dream number. And you see that Israel has a relatively large number, but it's not like if we say that the American Dream does not realize in the US compared to Canada and Denmark, Israel is somewhere there in the middle. And diving in to the decile resolution, this is from Korak 2013, the numbers for Canada. Here we see only those who were born to the bottom decile parents, and we see how they disperse across deciles. And we can see that when we zoom into these top deciles, there's a glass ceiling right here. So something's going on here, and we need to dig deeper into that discrepancy. And it makes sense due to the very high or relatively high top to bottom ratio. And paraphrasing Chetty's work, or someone who talked about Chetty, it's harder to climb a ladder when the rungs are further apart. So in Israel, the rungs are pretty far apart. So it makes sense that we'd see low positional mobility or upward mobility. What I did in my work, just as a comment to Oren's work, is I also dived into the different ethnicities or country of origin groups, and instead of looking within consistencies of each of these groups, I looked at the upward mobility, just a few sentences. It looked at the upward mobility of each of these groups to see the actual changes in the between those groups. I'll skip that. This is because Alan talked about it earlier. The probability of outranking your parents as a function of your parents' quantile, and this is like the obvious graph. This is very trivial. It's harder to do that when your parents are earning higher. But what's interesting is to take the groups, the different groups in Israel, and see how they deviate from that line. So this is what we see here. This is just an anecdote. The Arab groups is in orange, and the former Soviet Union group is in green. So when we look across the distribution, we see a sort of a divergence. Okay, so when everything is like throughout its significance, I think it's pretty obvious what we're seeing here, right? Okay, thank you.
Well, we should have already been having lunch 3 minutes ago. So, Ruben, you just have to give me some guidelines. Make it short and no questions.
So if the guys could get it up quick. Well, I wanted to use my time for three things. First of all, I have some methodological comments on Oren's work, and not just Oren's work, but some other things that have been going on here, including what we just heard now. Second thing, I have some numbers for Israel from Marcus, right? So he can add these numbers to his collection. And the third thing I wanted to do was to give some kind of perspective of how I see all this results implying something for policy. Okay? So to move this down, I just press the arrow here.
Yep.
Okay. So here's the famous Galton regression up at the top, and we've just seen estimates of beta from 2 speakers, and yesterday we saw more estimates from other speakers, and the assumption I'm making is that there's some intergenerational autocorrelation in the residual from the Galton regression. And this ties up with things that Eric was talking about earlier on this morning, about really what we want to do is we want to identify the causal effect of say income of parents on the income of their children when there's something you don't observe, which could be called genetics, which is you, where the genetics of the child, or the fitness of the child, depends on the fitness of the parent through rho. Suppose God told us what rho and beta were, right? So we had no problem estimating these things. What it would imply was that the intergenerational transmission and equality from one generation to the next depends on theta. And theta is what I've written here. Okay, so you can see that theta is going to be a very small number because it's the square of beta, and you add on 2 times rho beta, right? And we haven't spoken about rho here in this conference, but we should have done. And what this intergenerational transmission means is that there isn't much connection between the inequality in this generation and the inequality in the previous generation, because the mobility in income, beta, is very high. In other words, beta is a lowish number. And we'll also see that rho is a pretty low number too. And then if you ask if beta and rho were fixed across the generations, then what the model implies is that this would be the steady state degree of inequality in the society. And if you think of a unit variance for epsilon, then if beta and rho were 0, then the inequality would always be 1. But beta and rho are not 0. Typical implications of beta and rho is that the kind of inequality you get in society is that all this coefficient here increases inequality by something like 20 to 25%. Right? So if you put in these numbers. Now, of course, we would like to know what these numbers beta and rho are, because I'm assuming God hasn't told us. So we have to estimate them, and this is what we've just seen in Oren's talk. And by ignoring rho, the probability of the estimator of the OLS estimator of beta is what it really is, plus all this stuff here, which is, because we've ignored the genetic side and ignored the intergenerational serial correlation problem, the estimate of beta is an overestimate. So if we've just heard, for example, that the IgE was 0.27 something, that's an upper bound to that estimate. It should be less than that. So the question is, how do you solve this econometric problem? How do you identify beta? Well, you have to identify beta by having some information on UP, which is the unexplained component of the earnings of the parents. And there's a way of doing this through a generated regressive methodology. There's several ways of doing it. And this is one methodological problem that hasn't been, you might think about solving, and also the second speaker might think about solving. And typically what happens in these IgE estimates is that the assumption is that rho is 0. Rho is assumed to be implicitly 0, which is like saying that it's all nature, it's all nurture, and there's no nature. So rho is nature, it's sort of the fitness, how moving from one generation to the next. And beta is really what we want to estimate, but if we're not careful, our estimate of beta will also compound the estimate of rho. Now, another methodological problem, which is, Oren didn't have much time to talk about it, is what you do when you observe YP, you observe parents' income, but you don't observe children's income because they don't work. Or it could work the other way around. What happens when the parents have no income, but the children are working? And there's a discussion in Oren's paper about how to handle this, what to do about the zeros. And the short answer here is it's a selection problem. Who you observe, by using data on, where you have data on YC and YP, this is a double selection issue because the parents have to have an income and the children have to have an income. And who are these children and who are these parents? And there are ways of solving that, and because of the pressure of time, I will move on to the next part of the talk, which is for you, right? So here's some intergenerational correlations for Israel, and you cited this number here, but there's also an IB estimate which is much higher because it contains measurement error. And there's also, what you see on this slide is what's called the Gini mobility index. This is measuring, now the Gini mobility index, for those who are unfamiliar with it, is a number between 0 and 2. So if the number is 1, that is like saying there's no connection between your rank of the parents and between your rank in the distribution as a child. Okay? So just look at these Gini mobility indices for the 3 outcome measures here. They're pretty high, especially for earnings, and even for what I call permanent earnings, where it's based on more than just one observation. And so mobility, as we've seen, is pretty high. And here's sibling correlations, which you wanted to see. You can write it down. I'll give it to you afterwards, right? Don't have to write it down. Here's the sibling correlations, brothers and sisters. So it's got cut off here, I think it's brothers and brothers. And for schooling, for earnings. And if you think of extending the Galton equation for the outcome of the child, depends on the outcome of the parents and the outcome of his sibling, because siblings share each other, and so lambda is the sibling interaction coefficient, beta is the interaction coefficient between the parents and the children, lambda is the sibling interaction coefficient. Then for schooling, I get that the estimate of lambda is high. Siblings have a very positive effect on each other of 0.3 or so, and for earnings it's lower. But there's a lot of sibling dependence going on in the family, and by omitting the role of siblings, this gets picked up by IgE, because they're also part of the family, and these things have to be separated out. And I might say that because family sizes are pretty big in Israel by international comparison, so there's more scope for interaction with siblings. It's not just the sibling number 1, the sibling number 2, sibling number. My kids have sibling number 5, and there's a lot of interaction going on there. And so when you look at this in an Israeli context, family size matters compared to, say, I don't know what goes on in Sweden, right? What fertility is like. But I once got a referee's report from some Swedish referee who thought that having 2 children in the family was high fertility, right? Whereas we would look at that as a rather low fertility. So, and the last thing I want to say is that here's a model of income and education, right? So you have the first equation is an intergenerational Mincer regression, where theta is the return to E is education and Y is income here. So theta is the return to schooling, right, which comes out in this data about 0.1. The second equation is the intergenerational transmission of schooling from parents to children, and this coefficient gamma is number like, it's the IgE for schooling rather than the IgE for income. It's a number like 0.35. And beta, which is the causal effect of the transmission of parents onto children through their income, is a number like 0.25. And then when you work out from all this what is the relationship between inequality in income as measured by the variance and inequality in parents' education, and you say, well, what is the contribution of that inequality in parents' education through the education of their children onto the inequality of their income? It is tiny. It's a very tiny thing. So my takeaway on this, I don't know what's going to come out of this conference, my takeaway on this is that, okay, maybe the mobility is very high in Israel, and therefore this effect of leveling education among children through their parents is going to sort of make big changes to inequality in the next generation. It doesn't look like that, and I guess it's not going to be like that in other countries too. And what I picked up from your summary yesterday, Marcus, that you have a rather sympathetic view that there's not going to be much effect of leveling education, making more education more available to try and reduce the variance of education among children in order to create less income inequality in the next generation.